The foreword of this book sums it up pretty well. Much of witchcraft's fascination lies in its sinister association with the death-dealing rites and sexual excesses practiced in the name of black magic. But it has always included not only the black, but also the white. Witchcraft dates back to man's earliest attempts to relate himself to the scheme of his environment, starting as nature and fertility religion administered by the matriarchal element in prehistoric societies. Witchcraft continued as a powerful force throughout history and is presently experiencing a real revival. The reader learns about witchcraft's many facets: charms and potion, divination, clairvoyance, levitation, possession, the coven, the sabbat, familiars, werewolves, vampires, and the rites of the Black Mass. Now, from what I understand, this book was printed in the early 70s and has not been since. Quite a bit of beautiful illustrations within it, all by the illustrious Jan Parker. The book compiled by Peter Haining. It's the photograph on the back that really interests me. I'm not sure, I suppose the other 35 books in the series were part of a home reference library, so this one being quite the anomaly in the collection, and apparently highly sought after. Thrift store find for me, so probably be holding on to this one. During the discussion of the history of witchcraft, the prehistoric origins of witchcraft are examined, with a woman's role in birth and her sexual cycle coinciding with that of the moon, and her role in gathering the plants and herbs used for healing, laid the groundwork for her later preeminence in witchcraft. See, the woman was the counselor of wisdom and the priestess to the gods of nature. The man's responsibilities were far more direct at the time, providing food, shelter, defense. But because of her position, the woman was free to experiment on how to grow better crops, cure sickness, and her mind began to turn metaphysical. The women would discuss the world around them, the light and the darkness, the driving rain and the rushing waters, the changing seasons and the mystery of birth and death. From these basic conjecture came religion, a religion shaped and developed by women who was naturally its first priestess, her knowledge of herbs providing her with the power to heal. Her pondering on the mystery gave her the ability to command. She was doctor and priestess, and predominant above all in the religion was the goddess of fertility, the great mother, the life force at the center of existence. It was the moon that presided over her with three faces: the maid, the mother, and the wise ancient, the new moon, the full moon, and the waning moon. Now, what we now define as witchcraft developed primarily in Western, Central, and Northern Europe. Witchcraft was particularly suited to cold, dark, and wet climate of this part of the world. In efforts to keep a hold over the people, witch priests developed paraphernalia of mystery around their craft, created special clothes, masks, and ritual dances. These ceremonies were often during the period when the seasons changed. They would gather together to pay homage to the gods for the fertility of the fields and the rivers and the livestock and the womenfolk. See, these were great festivals and occasions for letting off pent-up energy. So, of course, sexual promiscuity was rife. But we should remember that these people did not look upon sexual intercourse the same moral standpoint as we do today. Their indiscriminate couplings were not sinful, but one of the few forms of expression used to show the Great Mother how they appreciated her gift of union between men and women. It was also here where these broomsticks became so much a part of the mythology of witchcraft. The women would bring these to the meetings, mimic horsemen riding into the assembly before their leader, hence the origin of the stories of witches flying. Now, indeed, there was the occasional blood sacrifice at these meetings, and these ritual killings were used by early opponents of the craft to embroider tales of human sacrifices to the devil. Now, into the age of civilization, witchcraft became only more of a dominant force. Looking into antiquity at Rome, we find priests holding positions of power and authority in all facets of society. all classes of people from the emperor downward. Magicians would use strange items for their divining, the entrails of beasts, the webs of spiders, live birds, and these practitioners guarded their secrets carefully, passed them on only to those initiated in the craft. Now, this is where deception was often used to preserve a sway over the people, with accounts of the gatherings of gods appearing and disappearing, and spirits that spoke folk disappearing into thin air, often accounted for with projection lamps, concealed assistants, and trick chambers. This is also when young society women well versed in the occult arts became a feature of the witchcraft scene, the beautiful sorceress who could bewitch both with her charms and her magic, the obvious sexual attraction of these women, giving them great status among men. Now, several Roman chroniclers have left us with graphic descriptions of rites and orgies conducted by such ladies under the aegis of witchcraft, the Romans being very captivated by witchcraft, from Augustus, who retained an occultist to interpret his dreams, to Nero, who kept astrologers for himself and his wife, to Commodus, who divined the future by using the entrails of noblemen's sons. Even after the empire was converted to a new religion, probably the most notorious of all emperors was Constantine V, who devoted much time, effort, and human life to the study of necromancy, the raising of the dead. Many Romans were in fear of their lives when it was known the emperor planned another regular ritual, for he believed human sacrifice was an integral part of the ceremony, and was not particular about whose corpse should find its way to his altar. Now, his rituals frequently turned into orgies of drinking and debauchery, and indeed it was this licentiousness for which he was condemned, rather than his gruesome occultism. Now, this is whenever there began to be a clear distinction between black and white magic, but needless to say, black magic was practiced as widely as ever, although being condemned, it provided an added diversion in the search for debauchery and perversion, which was so much a part of that Roman imperial life. Now, historically, many references to magic and occult rituals were observed throughout Europe, but nowhere else did it seem so apparent as in Britain. Now, during this time of Roman occupation and Druid resistance, the old religion, as witchcraft was being called, had developed its own carefully evolved rites, but they lacked historians and scholars of their own, so we do not know much about the details of early witchcraft in Britain. I was particularly fascinated by the story of the Witch of Berkeley, which I will recount in full here. According to the legend, on her deathbed, the witch confessed that her considerable wealth had come to her through selling her soul to the devil some years before. So she implored her friends to perform certain rituals to prevent the demons from carrying off her body. First, they must sew her corpse into the hide of a stag and place it in a stone sarcophagus, sealing this with molten lead and binding it with chains. 50 priests were then to be summoned to conduct mass for her soul, while another 50 were to sing dirges for the protection of her body. All this was to continue for 3 days and nights, after which she would have avoided the conditions of her pact. Now, all the instructions were painstakingly observed, but according to the Floris Historium, a host of demons broke into the church on both the first and second nights and attempted to open the coffin, but being beaten off by the combined effects of the lead sealing the sarcophagus and the priestly worship, the third night a hideous specter, a devil in gigantic form and of baleful countenance, appeared during the last rites, and ignoring the frantic singing, bellowed out that the woman was to come with him. A female voice was then heard to reply that she could not move as she was held fast in the sealed coffin, and with one blow the devil swept aside the priests, severed the chains, and pushed open the sepulchre. The priests watched helplessly as the figure then drew the old woman from the coffin, strode with her to the shattered door, and disappeared into the night, and by all accounts, the corpse of the unfortunate Witch of Berkeley was never recovered. Now, a lot of this book goes into the persecution of witches through the years, and the witch hunters and the witch mania, the inquisitors. It goes into different witchcraft acts and laws that were enacted in England and then in America. Now, with the torture of witches, the torture of witches was quoted to be to punish the most detestable crimes of which the human mind can conceive. One must punish with the utmost rigor the witches. See, the inquisitors believed that no witch should be executed without first making her confess, and that this confession should be made under torture so that it could be presumed to come from the heart. So the rack was undeniably the most effective and widely used of all implements, although thumb screws were often also used on the women. In Europe, strappado was a common torture. The victim's arms were tied behind her with a rope attached to a pulley, and then she was hoisted into the air, weights sometimes being attached to her feet to intensify the pain. Squassation was an even more brutal version. The prisoner was dropped from a height and jerked to a stop just short of the floor. This usually dislocated the limbs with one application, and 3 almost invariably killed. There's quite a bit of information on witchcraft as expressed in art and the familiars kept by witches, such as black cats, mice, or imps. Details about the organization of the coven and the ritual of the Sabbath is portrayed in exhaustive detail. Pacts with the devil, charms, the evil eye, possession and necromancy, and modern black magic and sorcery, levitation and werewolves and vampires. And the rest of the book is really wrapped up with anecdotes of witchcraft journey into modern time, stories of black magic practitioners and the rise of the Satanists, different clubs and hoaxes, and a whole excerpt on Aleister Crowley, another on the Nazis and modern-day witchcraft. Peter Haining has done a thorough job summing up such a mysterious and controversial subject.